All right, today we're diving into the Battle of Leipzig. We're talking about the single largest and bloodiest clash of the entire Napoleonic Wars. And trust me, this was not just another battle. This was a massive turning point in history, a truly desperate final gamble by an emperor who had his back against the wall.
You know, the conflict was so huge, with armies pouring in from all over Europe, that it got a new name almost immediately: the Battle of the Nations. And for good reason. It was a 4-day firestorm that would literally decide the fate of Napoleon's empire.
So, just how big are we talking? Well, look at this number. Over 500,000 soldiers clashing on one battlefield. To put that in perspective, this was the biggest battle in European history until World War I, a full century later. The scale is it's almost impossible to wrap your head around, and the stakes were every bit as high. So, how did it all come to this? I mean, just a year earlier, Napoleon was the undisputed master of Europe. But now, his entire empire was teetering on the very brink of collapse. You know, Napoleon himself summed it up perfectly. He said, "A year ago, all Europe marched with us. Today, all Europe marches against us." The tide had just turned so dramatically, and all those alliances that once propped him up were now lined up to take him down. And you can see how quickly it all happened right here. The road to Leipzig was just paved with one disaster after another. It really kicks off in 1812 with that catastrophic invasion of Russia, which completely wiped out his legendary Grande Armée. Then boom, June 1813, his forces in Spain get crushed. These defeats just emboldened his enemies, leading to the formation of the huge Sixth Coalition in August. We're talking Russia, Austria, Prussia, Sweden, all teaming up with one goal: his downfall. Now, Napoleon, ever the brilliant organizer, somehow manages to raise another massive army. But this new force, it had a critical weakness. It was an army of boys. Basically, raw, teenage conscripts who lacked the skill and the hardened experience of the veterans he'd lost in the Russian snows. And that experience was everything on a Napoleonic battlefield. So he's cornered, he's commanding this fragile new army, and he knows his only real chance is to force one single, decisive battle. A complete, winner-take-all showdown where his personal genius could maybe, just maybe, snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. This right here perfectly lays out the strategic chess match that was going on. On one side, you have Napoleon's strategy. Simple, direct. He wanted one epic clash to destroy the enemy army in one go. But on the other side, the Allies had a much, much cleverer plan. It was called the Trachenberg Plan, and the idea was genius. Avoid fighting Napoleon himself, the master, and instead go after his marshals, picking them off one by one to bleed his army dry. And you know what? The plan worked beautifully. The coalition landed a series of punishing blows, defeating Napoleon's top commanders at places like Grossbeeren, Kulm, and Dennowitz. Each of these losses stretched his supply lines thinner and thinner and chipped away at his inexperienced army, forcing him completely onto the defensive. So all this maneuvering, all these smaller battles, it was all building towards this one moment, at the city of Leipzig. This is where those two opposing strategies would finally collide in a battle of totally unprecedented scale. And at the heart of this massive conflict were these two men. On one side, you have Napoleon Bonaparte, fighting tooth and nail to save his empire. And on the other, Tsar Alexander I of Russia, the effective leader of the coalition, who is absolutely determined to see Napoleon utterly defeated. Okay, let's look at the numbers for a second, because they tell a really stark story. As you can see, Napoleon was just vastly outnumbered. He had about 195,000 troops and 700 cannons. Facing him, a colossal coalition army of nearly 360,000 soldiers and 1,500 cannons. I mean, the odds were just overwhelmingly, almost impossibly, against him. But even though he was outnumbered, Napoleon's forces fought with incredible ferocity. That first day, October 16th, was just a brutal, brutal slugfest. The fighting was horrific, and it ended in a bloody stalemate, with a staggering 50,000 casualties combined, and no clear winner. And right here, this is where the battle really turned. Napoleon was hoping for about 14,000 reinforcements to help shore up his battered lines, but the Allies? They had a staggering 145,000 fresh troops on the way.
The numerical vice was about to tighten into a grip that just couldn't be broken. So the whole battle is hanging in the balance, but a single, incredibly dramatic event was about to happen that would shatter Napoleon's chances and completely seal his fate at Leipzig. So with the fighting already so intense and the numbers so stacked against him, how did it all just completely unravel for the emperor? Well, the answer is one of the most dramatic betrayals in all of military history. On October 18th, right in the heat of the battle, thousands of his German allies from Saxony suddenly switched sides. I mean, they literally turned their cannons around and started firing on their former French comrades. An eyewitness actually described the moment of horrified realization. At first, the French thought the Saxons were charging the enemy, but then they just watched in horror as they ran over to the Prussians and asked to join their assault. Just like that, a massive hole was ripped open in Napoleon's battle line. It was a psychological and a physical blow his army just couldn't recover from. So why? Why did they defect? The reason is actually fascinating. Turns out the Saxon troops had this deep loyalty to their former commander, a guy named Bernadotte. But here's the twist. Bernadotte was one of Napoleon's own marshals who had since become the crown prince of Sweden and was now fighting against France. When the Saxons saw him on the field with the coalition, their loyalty just switched from Napoleon to him. And with that Saxon betrayal, the French line just crumbled. The battle was lost. And for Napoleon, this was well and truly the beginning of the end. The aftermath was pure chaos. The Grande Armée was forced into this desperate, bloody retreat right through the streets of Leipzig, fighting a ferocious rearguard action against the swarming Allied armies. The final butcher's bill was just immense. As you can see from these numbers, the French suffered 38,000 killed and wounded, and another 30,000 captured. The coalition casualties were even higher, at 54,000. That's a grand total of over 120,000 men lost in just 4 days, a scale of carnage Europe had never, ever seen before. And the political consequences? They were swift and total. Leipzig shattered Napoleon's hold on Germany. His confederation of the Rhine was dissolved. The very next year, the coalition armies invaded France itself, forcing Napoleon to abdicate and accept exile on the island of Elba. The defeat at Leipzig was the fatal blow to Napoleon's First Empire. It directly led to his abdication and set the stage for Waterloo. But it leaves us with this one final lingering question. After the absolute disaster in Russia, was a defeat of this magnitude and his eventual downfall truly inevitable?